Chapter 5. The Struggle. When I turned 17, I moved out of the house and away from my dad. I moved in with my godmother, Linda, who was my god sister Nicole's mother. It hurt me to move out so much because I wanted to be close to my siblings, but I had to. It was only 10 houses away, but I couldn't take my father's mental and verbal abuse anymore as much as I tried to. He was doing so bad at this time, I lost all respect for him. It was like he was two different people. I never knew who I was going to get when I spoke to him. He was rarely kind. Most of the time, he would tell me I was a hoe, a bitch, and I was going to be on welfare, but I had a job. It was like he didn't want to see me succeed. I knew if I stayed any longer, it would have gotten physical, and that wouldn't have been good. So I would help out from up the block. I always checked on my brothers and sisters. I made sure they ate, had food, and clothing while staying out of my father's presence. Being in my godmother's house was like being in a whole different world. I felt refreshed, but I could never really get too comfortable because I knew my brothers and sisters weren't comfortable. My godmother was a single, hard-working woman raising two children, Nicole and her brother Kenny. My god sister had a lot of freedom because my godmother was always working. We used to have a ball. I started borrowing her clothes and they would do my hair. I finally started looking like something, and then guys started liking me. I didn't have the things that boys were attracted to, like a big butt. I was as skinny as a rail, but my personality used to always attract the opposite sex for some reason. I started working temp jobs and I began to make more money, so I was able to buy my own clothes. I started going out to all the school 12 parties, which was where was happening then. There was also another spot called There was also another spot called Brown Eyes, which was a lounge. I spent I went to another place called Authors, and I was feeling myself. I started traveling to the city on the train with all my best friends on my block. My friends were named Nicole, Autumn, Carrie, and Nene, and they were from Riverdale. I can't forget Dottie. Dottie had the biggest heart of them all. That was my crew. They were the coolest. There's nothing like having great friends. They never judged me, and I loved them for that. I started dating a guy from Harlem. He was my first real boyfriend. I was only 17, and I noticed he was looking for sex, so I was scared to death. I had never had sex before. I was a virgin. His name was Ed, and he was a very handsome guy. My friends called him a pretty boy. He had nice curly hair and a caramel complexion. He was also a drug dealer, and he made more money than I was used to seeing. I knew he could sleep with any girl he wanted to. He turned out to be very respectful. He loved how I respected myself, which is something my dad taught me early on that I held on to. That wall I built blocked all the bitches and hoes he called me. Shoot, I always thought that if I had sex, I might get pregnant, and I sure didn't want any kids after what I'd been through. I just wanted to have fun, and I didn't want to have fun with any boy that couldn't take care of himself. I wasn't a gold digger, but I was already taking care of my little brothers and sisters, and I was not trying to take care of anybody else. I especially was not going to take care of no growing young man. We did a lot of kissing. Sadly, after dating Ed for a year and making trips back and forth to Harlem to just having a great time with him and his family, Ed got arrested and went to jail. From what his brother told me, he went for a very long time. I finally landed a gig at the Bank of New York doing check processing, and I was so excited. The money was more than I was used to making. One day when I went to my father's house to check in to see how everything was going, He told me that a friend said that someone ran into my mother at a supermarket in New Jersey. I said, "What? After 3 whole years? Now, out of nowhere, someone tells you this? Are they sure it was her?" He said, "Well, I don't know. I'm going out there to investigate it." I didn't know what to think when he told me that, so I just proceeded with my life and waited till he got back. 3 days passed and I started working at the bank that week. I got a call that my dad wanted to see me. I thought to myself, he must have some news about my mother. I ran to his house. My father was sitting in a chair looking pale white and just staring into space. I knew automatically it wasn't good news. They must have found her dead. At the sight of him, I was almost afraid to ask, but I had to know she was dead. I said, "Dad, what's up?" He looked over at me and said, "I really don't know how to tell you this." Not good, I thought. I replied, "I already know. She's dead, right?" He said, "No, your mother's very much alive." I didn't want to tell you that it was my sister who told me. People around town were saying they have been seeing your mother. When I got to New Jersey, my sister told me that they think your mother is living in your grandmother's house with your grandfather. I said, "Oh, okay. So why are you upset about that?" He said, "Because they kicked your grandmother out and your mother has been sleeping with my father for years. That's who she left us for. That's why we haven't heard from my family. They didn't know how to tell me." Well, my heart and my jaw hit the floor. I didn't know if I should be happy that my mother was alive or mad because she was right in New Jersey and did not try to call us once. She left us and started a new life with my grandfather. I know my father's family was hurt, but not one of them thought to call and say, "We know where she is." Your mother is not dead. We have suffered for years because we didn't know. They just said nothing. Do they know the hell me and my brothers and sister have been going through just to survive? Are people really that selfish? I learned from my life experience that you can't put your energy in other people's actions. It just take too much out of you. I looked at my father and I could see the hurt and betrayal in his eyes. For the first time in my 17 years, my father broke down in tears with a cry I have never heard before. It was hard to explain, but I just embraced him, and again, I was hurting. I was angry and I was confused, but I had to be strong for him. I stayed there with my father for several hours until I felt he was okay. It was the first time I could say that he was my father again. After I left my father's house receiving that news, it made me feel crazy mentally. I thought about all the things we've been going through the past 3 years. I thought about all the Mother's Days that passed by and all the other holidays, and not once did she pick up the phone to check on her 1 year old son or her 4 year old daughter that she left. I mean, who the hell does that? What kind of woman, let alone a mother, would do that? I was in disbelief. So I went back the next day after work and I asked my dad how he knew for sure that my mother was alive. He said, "I got down to Trenton, New Jersey, and my sister told me they knew. If they had told me they found out last year, I would have gone crazy." His sister also reminded him that a year before his wife disappeared, when their grandfather passed away in Alabama, my mother went to the funeral to represent him because he couldn't make it. At breakfast time, my grandmother went to her room and the door was locked. She knocked and knocked, and when the door finally opened, there stood my mother smirking. She was standing there butt naked in the doorway as the smell of sex creeped out the room. The only reason my grandmother didn't beat the living shit out of my mother was because she was her son's wife. My grandmother couldn't believe what she was seeing. Hearing the story from his sister, my dad said he almost lost his mind and asked where they were. His sister said, "Listen, you can't go to jail. You still have your children that need you." My father told her, "Man, fuck that hoe. I don't ever want her back. I just need to see this for myself." So he went and got some cherry bombs to throw in the house, because if she was in the house, the cherry bombs would force her out. My dad and his friends went over there. My dad lit up 4 cherry bombs and threw them into the downstairs window. One of the cherry bombs broke a window. A few minutes later, he could not believe what his eyes were seeing. My mom came running out, half dressed like a skank, wearing these short shorts and a wife beater. That was something he had never seen her wear before. He said it took every bone in his body not to run over there and snatch her up. Someone in the house must have called the police, so my dad and his friends jumped in their car and left. After hearing that story, I started laughing because I couldn't believe my dad went down there and did that. He wasn't playing. It was really courageous of him to do. You can tell me he was really hurting. You could tell he was really hurting over this. I mean, it was too much for me to take in at the time. I felt like my head was spinning when he told me this. This this was my dad's father, the man who raised him. This was the love of his life, the mother of his children, my mama, who was sleeping with him. His wife had abandoned him and their family to be with his father. My father's wife was responsible for taking his father away from his mother. My grandma was our family's foundation, and now she is all messed up. On top of all that, my father's life and family was turned upside down. It was just one big mess. I felt paralyzed in my mind and body. I was at loss for words. I sat in our kitchen with my father and kind of stared into space with him. It was completely silent. All you could hear was the fan going back and forth. The kitchen was hot as hell, even with the fan blowing. The heat was the least of our worries. It was a moment I will never forget for the rest of my life. After knowing the truth about my mother, I was devastated. I was too embarrassed to tell anyone. I didn't know what to do or what to think. My head was spinning. I looked at my brothers and sisters who were getting so big and thought to myself, God, is this really what's happening? My mother made this choice. She chose to leave and abandon her children. She wasn't kidnapped, had lost her memory, or dead. Wow. I just started feeling very empty and confused. I felt a little crazy as I thought about my sweet grandmother and all she must have gone through. Now I knew why my family in New Jersey wasn't checking up on us. They were dealing with all that mess. I realized my mother didn't only ruin our lives, she also ruined everyone else's.